Hello, and welcome to Of the People. I am Robert Chernin. Moral equivalence as a justification for political violence. So we are in the fifth week of the Hamas war against Israel, against the West, as we'll talk about in a second. And former President Obama said the following, which if you didn't see it, folks, you have to. Obama was on a podcast and said, if there's any chance of us being able to act constructively, to do something, it will require an admission of complexity and maintaining what on the surface may seem contradictory ideas. That what Hamas did was horrific and there's no justification for it. And what is also true is that the occupation and what's happening to Palestinians is unbearable. So moral equivalence basically says there is no right or wrong, right? That one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. So my question is, have we lost such moral clarity and there is no right or wrong that justification for political violence ends up being the result and it's okay? So it's okay to rape women. It's okay to behead babies. It's okay to burn people alive because one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And let's think back to where all this came from initially. Remember when you were in school and two kids got into a fight and the teacher couldn't figure out who was right or wrong? So therefore, or chose not to, by the way, then therefore they punished them both. What message did that send to the aggressor? Is that it's okay because we're both going to be punished. Now, the Obamas of the world, and grant you that former President Obama is in a class by himself, maybe not by himself, but he should be. That would be the guy in the corner. President Obama and his ilk, Life Springs, all that sensory perception training in the 70s during the hippies that, well, that may work for you, but it doesn't work for me. That's your truth. That's not my truth. Let's be really clear here. There is no moral equivalence. It's not Israel whose charter calls for wiping the Palestinians off the map. It's not Israel that uses hospitals and shelters and temples or mosques as hiding places for their weaponry. It's not Israel that trains their children to be suicide bombers and to become martyrs. It's not Israel that puts homosexuals or other human rights people to death because it contravenes the religion. The only country in the Middle East that supports all these human rights is Israel. So this whole moral equivalence stuff is absolutely ridiculous. And my question to everyone is, if we can't tell the difference between right and wrong, then we've lost our humanity. And I'm going to end the monologue with the following story. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and one of the audience members asked, why does the Muslims hate the Jews? And it's not all Muslim. We're talking about radical Islam, of course. You're talking about Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran. Why do they hate the Jews? And my response was the following. They don't just hate the Jews. The Jews are the tip of the spear. If they're successful in exterminating the Jews and driving them in the sea, if you're Christian, you're next. Because this really is not about the Jews solely. This is a war for humanity, and it's a war on the West. It's a war on Judeo-Christian values. And if we don't have the moral clarity to understand that, and by the way, that's the difference, right? Moral equivalence, there is no right or wrong. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Versus moral clarity, there is right or wrong. And you have to be willing to stand up and call out right or wrong. If we've lost that ability, then we've lost our humanity, and maybe we get what we deserve in all of this. Moral equivalence justifies political violence. And when you have people like President Obama who calls Israel an occupier, folks, Israel withdrew from Gaza, I think it was in 2014. So I guess what they're saying is that Israel's occupying the land since 1948, which is a whole nother thing we're going to talk about later on in the show. But leave it at this. Moral equivalence or moral clarity, because moral equivalence leads to political violence being okay. And it's not okay with me. Is it okay with you?